Hi everyone, welcome to our today's meeting, which is dedicated to a very important topic, which is called the horrific disaster at the Kakhovka Dam, exploring the environmental, economic and social dimensions of the global catastrophe in Ukraine. So I am the moderator of today's meeting. My name is Hanna Skeban, and I am a leader of Green Team in Ukraine, of our eco community. So as you know, now the month of July is dedicated to eco-friendly initiatives, Plastic-Free July, all around the world, and in EPAM as well, we are joining. And while we were thinking about what topic we can bring for this event, we decided that we cannot avoid such important topic, which is the disaster at the Kakhovka Dam. That's why we invited scientists, researchers, professors for today's meeting to explain to all of us what is happening now and what are the consequences of this terrible disaster. So to start, let's see the short video about this event, and then we will continue our conversation. So these were the first video from the first days, from the first hours after the catastrophe. And today we will have the possibility to discover what are the consequences for environment and for the social dimension after this catastrophe. Before we start, I would like to remind you that we have the recording of this meeting, so you will have the possibility to watch it after the event. And also, if you have any questions to our speakers, you can post them into our VR community platform in the Q&A session. Unfortunately, today we won't have enough time to answer all the questions, but after the meeting we will pass them to our speakers and we'll get all the answers and share them with you. So let's start with our first speaker, speakers, Alexander Khodosovtsev and Anna Kuzmenko. Alexander Khodosovtsev is a professor at the Department of Botany at Kherson State University, Ukrainian Nature Conservation Group Scientific degree, Doctor of Biology professor, and Anna Kuzmenko, Doctor of Biology, Holodny Institute of Botany, National Academy of Science of Ukraine, Ukrainian Nature Conservation Group. So I pass the word to Alexander.
Good afternoon, everybody. We are start. On June 6, 2023, at deep night, the Russian military blew up the Kakhovka hydroelectric power plant, which had been mined by them in late February 2022. The terrorist attack on the Kakhovka Dam caused the environmental and social disaster of global significance in the 21st century in Europe. In this part of the report, we will not address the social and economical impacts, which are only being estimated, but will focus only on the environmental impacts, based on our own research, analysis of the document facts, and expert database ecosystem development forecasts. The first analytical materials on the impact on nature were prepared and published by Ukrainian Nature Conservation Group, of which we are also co-authors. It can be stated that the negative consequences of this criminal act of terrorism for wildlife will be manifested on an area of the least 5,000 square kilometers. This is a zone of flooding and drainage. In this zone, 52 nature protected areas of Ukraine, including 5 national nature parks and the Black Sea Biosphere Reserve, were affected. 8 sites of Emerald Network and 33 habitats of Resolution 4 of the Berne Convention have been affected and will suffer from the destruction of the Kakhovka Dam. The habitats of 23 species of plants and fungi included in the Red Data Book of Ukraine are under threat as well. The drainage zone. This is less public discussion about it, but in our opinion, the catastrophic consequences will manifest it here over time more strongly than in the flooding zone. The consequences of the disaster will have a negative impact of the Emerald Network site Kakhovka Reservoir and Veliki Lug National Natural Park, as well as wetlands of international importance, Archipelago Veliki and Male Kuchuguri, and the Sim-Makiv floodplain. We had to conduct research on the territory of the Kamenska Sich Natural Nature Park, which is located on the front line. In the Kamenska Sich, the water level decreased by more than 10 meters in some places. As a result, the coastline has withdrawn up to 500 meters. As a result of the draining, aquatic bioresources were lost in the large areas. The Kakhovka Reservoir, like the lower floodplains of the Dnipro River, has one of the largest concentration of freshwater commercially important fish species in Ukraine. At the time of the terrorist attack, the Kakhovka Reservoir alone was habitat to no less than 30 fish species, of which 20 species have commercial importance. Annual catches amount to up to 2.6 thousand tons. It will take a minimum of 7 years to restore such stocks. All spawning grounds and the main volume of water, which are the fish habitats, have been destroyed. The first fish mortality was registered the very next day after the dam was blown up. Wintering holes in the right bank of the Kakhovska Reservoir are no longer existent. Within a few hours, this zone has been exposed, inevitably leading to the death of the majority of benthic organisms in the former reservoir. Billions of benthic individuals died. These included various invertebrates, mollusks, other small animals, which are food base for fish, birds, amphibians, and other. For example, in one dry small pool, 20 square meters, I found 20 dead crayfish. As a result of catastrophic decrease in water level in the reservoir, aquatic and riparian plants and wetland vegetation of the Kakhovka Reservoir will disappear. In their place, invasive alien plants as Ambrosia artemisifolia, as well as native weeds as Portulaca oleracea and other will take over. Overall, the exposed zone of the reservoir bed will become the largest hotspot of dangerous invasive species propagation in the region. In general, within the territory affected by the ecological disaster in the drainage zone, 19 rare habitat types protected under the Berne Convention have been identified. Areas of the Emerald Network were created in Ukraine specifically for this protection. Aquatic habitats and waterlogged habitats will suffer the most from the decision. Probably river nature semi-natural forests will be disappear. Flooded area. Quantifying the extent of fauna destruction is impossible since no research on similar catastrophes has been conducted in Ukraine. However, it can confidently be stated that the scale of this catastrophe is difficult to compare with any previous event in Ukraine. Over the past 90 years, the floodplain of the Dnieper River in Ukraine has been regulated with the construction of 6 dams and populated by animals that lack effective mechanisms for escaping flooding. The rapid rise in water levels in low-lying areas and especially on islands leaves no chance to survive for most terrestrial animals and most bird species. On June 6, in one day, some species population faced a significant impact, maybe even bigger than they have experienced in the past 100 years. In total, maximal flooded area were more than 600 square kilometers. The flooded area includes fully or partially 7 emerald network sites, established by the decision of the Council of Europe. The Dnipro Delta is listed as wetland of international importance under the Ramsar Convention. Moreover, the desalination of the northern part of the Black Sea may negatively impact for the other Ramsar wetland in the region. According to our calculation, 47 national protected areas, included Black Sea Biosphere Reserve, National Nature Parks, Белобережье Святослава, Нижнепровский, Олешківські Піски, and Kinburn Split Regional Landscape Park will be partially or completely affected by flooding. Sand dunes was particularly flooded. Sand dunes fauna was particularly flooded. There has been a catastrophic impact on population of globally endangered mammal species. For example, 70% of the world population of Cycista loriger has been flooded, which may lead to its extinction in the future. The single population of Triturus dobrodicus within the Kherson region in Lower Dnipro was destroyed. In the flood zone, important nesting sites of aquatic and shore bird species will be destroyed, including 10 to 1,000 of individuals. The catastrophic impact affected birds during their nesting period, including the presence of fledglings. There is no time left for the establishment of new colonies and subsequent. Many birds will lose their nesting colonies, but will be able to restore their population from 3 to 10 years. Plants. For example, local endemic Centaurea pachuskiana was described from scent near the village Novogrednevo on Ingulets River in Kherson region. 80% of the world population of this species was destroyed by flooding. And for example, second, the Tricolous lichen Circinaria ukrainica, discovered by me with colleagues in 2021 in Oleshki sand dunes. All locations were flooded and probably were destroyed before the effective publishing of the species description. And the Black Sea, the organic contamination was observed in 5 countries during 5 days after the explosion of the Kakhovka Dam. In general, the destruction of the Kakhovka Dam had an environmental impact on a scale much larger than the territory of South Ukraine and became an international problem. I'm finished, and words to Anna.
Hello for everybody. My colleague Alexander showed you the current situation. And I will try to provide you with our vision how to minimize the impact of this disaster for environment. For drainage zone, probably the most urgent measures could be resettlements of fish from parts which were still with water to the Dnipro River. You already saw these thousands of individual of fish species which are dying without water, so it's still possible to save at least some of them. And also another problem is how to prevent drying and disperse silt with a lot of harmful chemicals which were accumulated on the bottom of Kakhovka reservoir during 70 years. Some experts proposed to sow seeds of annual and perennial species for on these muddy sediments, but I think it could be important measure, at least in part of this area. But when we visited this territory, we realized that maybe it's impossible for in some of this area, because this silt is very dense, and some crust of soil algae already formed there, and hopefully they will prevent this silt from drying and dispersion. But in long-term perspective, we proposed restoration of grassland vegetation on these territories. Probably it is impossible just spontaneous rewilding, because all these territories surrounded by arable lands, so there are almost no propagules from native plants, but there are propagules and seeds of invasive plants. So for this purpose can be used the technology which were already used for restoration of Tarutinsky steppe in Odessa region, which were ploughed several years ago. And during our visit to this territory, we established some permanent plot for studying revegetation of this area. Also, we sampled some samples of soils for analyzing algae content in them, and also bacteria and viruses. For flooding zone, of course, the most urgent measures is reducing of water level is as soon as possible, and also to rescue some animals who was able to survive in this disaster. But in long-term perspective, probably it would be good to initiate some project on restoration of populations of species of flora and fauna which were damaged by flooding. At least some terrestrial mammals, and also plants, endemic plant species, using some resources which were preserved in zoos and botanical gardens. But here we faced the problems of availability, germplasm of such species, because National Center for Plant Genetic Resources was destroyed by Russian troops in Kharkiv, and now we also need some project for collection, at least germplasm of endemic species for Ukraine. What about Black Sea? So we are not the expert in this area, but we trust our colleagues, at least hydrobiologist from Odessa, Yuri Kvach, who proposed, you know that Black Sea were now contain a lot of contaminations of chemicals and biogenic contaminants. So our colleague proposed just mechanical removal of these contaminants from coastal zone. But in long-term perspective, it would be good to create some artificial reefs, and it will be very helpful for cleaning sea waters. And now probably the most actual question about strategy. So there are two extreme options to restore Kakhovka hydropower plant, or to leave everything as it is and to wait rewilding of this area. In our opinion, both these strategies are extremes, and most probably they are impossible because first strategy would be return to 70 years back to Soviet time, but second strategy is impossible because of climate change, because of distribution of seeds of alien invasive plants. So probably it's impossible to restore natural vegetation or potential natural vegetation without some active measures. So this is all from our side, and thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Daria. Thank you, Anna. Thank you, Alexander. And I pass the word to Daria Malchikova, Vice Rector for Educational, Scientific and Pedagogical Affairs, Doctor of Geographical Sciences, Professor of the Department of Geography and Ecology. Daria, the word passes to you.
Thank you very much, Anna. Dear colleagues, I'm very grateful for your kind invitation to be here today, and I will try to convey the main messages of this report. We would like to focus on the economic, social, and humanitarian aspects of the global catastrophe at the Kakhovka Dam. At the beginning of the large-scale invasion, the Kakhovka power plant was one of the first objects which had been occupied by Russian troops. This fact is understandable as it is of crucial importance for the southern, many steppe regions of Ukraine in economic, agriculture, recreational, and in the recent time, geopolitical aspects. After a few months of the large-scale invasion, researchers of the Kherson State University began analyzing possible scenarios of the occupiers' actions. Unfortunately, the day of the article was published coincided with the global catastrophe of explosion of the Kakhovka reservoir dam by the occupiers. We can see a lot of horrific images of the consequences of the disaster, but their scale needs to be analyzed in the context of the national and global significance of the Kakhovka reservoir and the Kakhovka hydroelectric power plant. We shall be looking at the following key points: the scale of the disaster, individual and global dimensions, consequences of the Kakhovka reservoir disaster, and function of the Kakhovka reservoir and effects of a long-term natural society coadaptation, ways to solve the consequences of the disaster. The direct horrific impact of the disaster include flooding, death, destruction of the homes and infrastructure, water shortage, pollution, the extinction of rare species of flora and fauna, dewatering of the reservoir basin, etc. At the same time, there are also many long-term consequences of this disaster related to the unique role of Kakhovka reservoir for the Ukrainian economic and society. And there are global challenges to environmental and flood security of the water and direct threats to nuclear safety. The Kakhovka reservoir became catastrophically shallowed after the dam had been blown up. For example, the water level in the Dnipro River near Zaporizhia has fallen by 3.8 meters. At the same time, one settlement of the right bank of the Dnipro River and 70 settlements of the temporarily occupied left bank territories remained flooded. Today, the Dnipro has almost returned to its old channel, with some places being just streams and system of lakes. Nature is recovering, but this situation has catastrophic consequences for people. Key challenges as a result of direct losses included Problems of drinking and technical water supply. Almost 10% of Ukrainian population depended directly and indirectly on water supply from the Kakhovka reservoir. Since the start of the rescue operation, more than 1,000 tons of drinking and technical water have been provided. There is an emergency response, but everyday life is impossible in this condition. Contamination of water, local water supply and sewerage system, poultry farm, pig farms, waste dumps were submerged. Undoubtedly, flooded pit latrines have become a source of chemical, bacteriological, and virological pollution. There is a terrible stench in the areas and houses where the water has resided. The destruction of the houses, communal infrastructure, and industrial objects. Even buildings that were not formally destroyed have become unusable. In addition, the lack of the river flow regulation and the possibility of periodic flooding during seasonal floods now puts large areas of built-up riverine areas at risk. How, what, and where should it be rebuilt? A decrease in the connectivity of Ukrainian geospace, blowing up of the Antonievsky Bridge in Kherson and the dam of the Kakhovka hydroelectric power plant reduced transport connection between the left and right banks catastrophically. In fact, below Zaporizhia, there is no land connection between the banks of the Dnipro for more than 300 kilometers. Moreover, we lost the opportunity to use the Dnipro for shipping. The remains of the dam have become barriers that will be impossible to overcome even with dredging. We can analyze the long-term losses and consequences of the Kakhovka dams blasting only with deep understanding of its strategic function. The construction of the Kakhovka reservoir and dam in 1960s has numerous negative consequences. But further on, there was a long-term natural society coadaptation. In fact, we are talking about 70 years of symbiotic development between humans and the nature they created. The main functions of the Kakhovka reservoir and hydroelectric power plants are sustainable water supply. Water availability in southern region of Ukraine is very low, 1.1 cubic meter per person per year. The Kakhovka reservoir provided the possibility of a normal life for almost 4 million people in the southeastern region of Ukraine. 2. Electricity generation. Kakhovka power plant, Zaporizhia nuclear power plant, and Zaporizhia thermal power plant in Enerhodar formed a powerful energetic hub. Water from Kakhovka reservoir is needed to cool power generating units of Zaporizhia nuclear power plant. Zaporizhia nuclear and thermal power plants produce almost 23% of the capacity of the entire Ukrainian energy sector and just under 30% of electricity annually produced by 2021. That's why control of these power plants is very important for the occupiers. As you can see now, they manipulate nuclear power plant security, and it is very dangerous. It may cost the second Chernobyl. Irrigation of the steppe region in Ukraine. Irrigation allowed enlarging the area of agriculture activity and positively influenced development of the overall economical situation in the region. In its turn, it has created a favorable condition for social development by increasing economical potential, creating more jobs. The irrigation significantly changed the structure of agriculture industry. Over 30% of grains, 95% of vegetables, 60% of fodder, and all rice were produced in irrigated lands. And social life. Development in the south of Ukraine led to significant changes both in the rural economy and in social aspects. Irrigation has influenced the population formation. Some interesting facts. Density of population in the areas with well-developed irrigation is 50% higher compared to the average in the region. And size and inhabitation rate for a settlement within the irrigated zone is twice higher compared to the average in the region. In the 19th century, the southern region has experienced a severe drought once every 3 years. Since 20th centuries, amelioration became a national priority, and after 1950, a huge plan for water supply was launched. In 1950, USSR began construction of Kakhovka power plant and large-scale irrigation system, as you can see in slide, on the area of more than 300,000 hectares. That system supplied with drinking water and irrigated Kherson, Zaporizhzhia region, and the Crimea. At the beginning of the 1990s, the total irrigated area in Ukraine was reaching over 2.5 million hectares. Water management of irrigation system was very powerful in Ukraine. Only the length of the Crimea, North Crimea Canal was more 400 kilometers. Through this canal, Ukraine supplied up to 85% of Crimea water needs. After the annexion of the Crimea by Russians, Ukraine shut down the water supply to the Crimea, and it worked according to the needs of water users in Ukraine. Interestingly, during the years of Operation Crimea Canal, the volume of water passed through the canal is equal to half the volume of the Azov Sea. And now I would like to demonstrate the impact of irrigation on the population and system of settlement, for example, in Kherson region. It can be seen on this slide that the spatial distribution of natural water objects is extremely uneven. They are concentrated mostly in the western and central part of territory, while the other parts of the region are anhydrous. Natural conditions of the territory is early stages of economic development determined the distribution of the population and specialization of its economic activities. Human settlements are closely tied to water sources. Construction of the Kakhovka reservoir caused an increase in number of human settlements during a relatively short period of time. The map shows the new settlements, Nova Kakhovka, Bila Krynica, Kar'yerna, and Nova Kakhovka had a key points as a driver for periphery development. A fundamental change of agriculture industry of Kherson region, in the Kherson region, significantly influenced the work style of the rural population. Settlements located in irrigated areas ensured technical maintenance of irrigation system and its management. Irrigation requires a lot of human labor and allows growing more labor-intensive crops, for example, vegetable. On this slide, there is graphical representation of changing patterns of population settlement in intensive irrigation areas. There are also two maps for visual comparison. As you can see, the correlation is very strong. And if we compare the graph of the share of irrigated lands in communities of Kherson region and the mean rate of settlement population growth, they look very similar. It proves a direct and a very strong connection between these two indicators. So the factor of water melioration had a great social importance. We need to understand and remember these factors as we continue to consider the consequences of the disaster in the context of the search for solution. In my opinion, when we discuss post-catastrophe scenarios, the following 2 points are the most important. So, the first priority factor is that the Dnipro basin in its lower area is a battlefield further increase the impact of the disaster. Until the whole territory of Ukraine is deoccupied, it is very difficult to plan fundamental reconstruction work. Secondly, in any scenario, we must put the needs of people and communities at first place. It doesn't mean to ignore environmental risks. Ukraine is fighting for freedom, for human lives, demonstrating human resistance and human patriotism to occupiers. Therefore, community participation and inclusion of their interests is high priority, in my opinion. Today, 2 main scenarios are being discussed. First, reconstruction of Kakhovka hydroelectric power plant and Kakhovka reservoir using new technologies, possibly smaller volume, etc. And non-restruction of Kakhovka hydroelectric power plant and Kakhovka reservoir, recovery of the natural riverbed of the Dnipro. However, in wartime, it is most likely worth thinking about an alternative model. On the one hand, we should think how to provide basic needs of the people and society as a whole and to restore Kherson region from the consequences of the disaster as much as possible. On the other hand, our task is to protect the ecosystem as much as possible until the final decision is accepted after our victory. Okay, that brings us to the end of this presentation, and I'm very thank you for listening.
Thank you, Daria, for your presentation. And I pass the word to Sergei Lisovsky. Sergei is Deputy Director of the Institute of Geography, National Academy of Sciences of Ukraine, Doctor of Geographical Sciences, Professor, Vice President of the Ukrainian Geographical Society. So, Sergei, the word passes to you.
Thank you a lot. Hello, everybody, dear colleagues. As you just could hear, Daria Malchikova told a lot of socio-economical consequences of this catastrophe on Kakhovska HPP. And I'm also will say about this catastrophe. The Kakhovsky HPP was a key element of a hydroelectric power plant complex which provided not only and not so much electricity needs in the regions of southern Ukraine, but also irrigation of large agricultural lands in the area, primarily Kherson, Zaporizhzhia regions, and Air Crimea. The reservoir provided drinking and household water for the population needs, while also solving the issue of industrial water supply in the region. The Kakhovsky HPP and dam also performed important transportation and logistics functions, providing the waterway navigation between Kherson and Zaporizhzhia and rail and road connections between the banks of the Dnieper River. Thanks to the water of the Kakhovsky reservoir, the production of significant volumes of agricultural products was ensured in the Kherson and Zaporizhzhia region. But there was else one reason of construction this Kakhovsky HPP and the cascade of reservoir on the Dnieper. This cascade was considered by a Komi government as a possible barrier to the advance of North Atlantic Treaty Organization troops in the event of war. By blowing up the hydroelectric dams, it would be possible to create a continuous, impossible strip between the left and right bank, Ukraine for a month or more. It was such reason that Russian terrorists destroyed the dam on the Kakhovskaya HPP in order to stop Ukrainian army in Kherson region. In particular, some words about the significance of Kakhovský HPP hub. In particular, in 2021, the total volume of freshwater consumption in Kherson region was 703 million cubic meters, or 11.44% of the total in Ukraine. In preceding years, this number was even higher. The total water consumption of the gross regional product in the Kherson region was almost 6 times higher than Ukraine average. The main consumer of water is the region was agriculture. In 2018, there were 427.1 thousand hectares of irrigated land in the region, or 21.6% of the region total agricultural land area, including 384.5 thousand hectares from state irrigation system. The irrigated lands of the region were an insurance fund for the state production of agricultural products, especially in the extreme drought years. And this map, as you can see in this slide, shows concentration areas according to the contracted agreement localization. In this slide, you can see that Kherson region, especially part located near the Kakhov reservoir, was the point of concentration investment. Investment, and there were not only Ukrainian investors, and there were also foreign investors, and that's why this catastrophe is catastrophe of a global range. This map shows that territory of the left Dnieper river bank, south of the Kakhovsky reservoir, is characterized by the absence of a natural hydrologic network. As well, you can see on the next slide, no rivers, no floods. And the next problem of this region is that this region don't have big resources underground resources. The less level in Ukraine. The next problem after this catastrophe is that now exists risk of artificial earthquake, because there were 10 cubic kilometers of water, and now this water eliminate, and that's why there is risk of such technical or anthropogenic earthquake. In this slide, you can see that Ukraine has 1,248 cubic meter resources per capita every year. And if we compare with average level in the world, you can see that Ukraine has in 5 times less resources per capita than in the world. But our nearest country, Slovak Republic, Turkey, Poland, has more than Ukraine water resources. In Europe, only Moldova has less figures. And this figures is on the map on this slide. You can see index of water resources provided on the of the world population, and Ukraine has one of the worst position in the world as whole. But the south part of Ukraine has the lowest level than in Ukraine average, and such region, the Kherson region, Zaporizhzhia region, has the lowest level of water supply in Ukraine. And that's why the problem of water supply is this region so urgent. The next slide shows that ecological level condition in the south part of Ukraine were not quite good. And after this disaster, they will not became better. Once more, the in structure of land resources in this region, the dominate agricultural land. The share of agricultural land is the biggest in Zaporizhzhia, 82%, in Mykolaiv 81%, Kherson almost 70%, but the share of forest is not more than 5%. And after the construction of the dam, the urban population of region increased significantly. And and it's the reason why so urgent problem of water supply, first of all, in the cities of region. And this slide shows that the population of some cities in the region almost doubled. For example, Kryvyi Rih, Zaporizhzhia. And in these cities, problem not only supplies for inhabitants, for population, but there are a lot of significant in state scale industrial plants here. And what will be with these industrial plants now? It's a great question. The Kakhovka disaster also led to disruption of transportation links along the Dnipro River, including the disruption of river transportation opportunities of Ukraine grain and other agricultural products export, and disruption of transportation and logistical chains in the latitudinal direction. Threats and risk of destruction of residential, industrial, and infrastructure objects in areas of flooding, including threats of destruction of critical infrastructure objects and potentially dangerous objects, are also a great danger. According to the risk passport of the Kherson region, there is a significant number of man-made hazards in the flood zone. Among them, chemical hazard facilities, as well as facilities containing toxic industrial waste and unusable toxic chemicals, pose a particular threat. The undermining of the Kakhovka HPP dam by Russian terrorists also caused a serious threat to the historical and cultural potential of the region. We have identified 118 monuments of immobile cultural heritage that were destroyed, damaged, or are in danger of flooding due to the explosion of the Kakhovka HPP dam. Among them are 14 monuments of national importance and 108 local ones. Of them by type, 46 monuments of architecture and urban planning, 49 of history, and etc., etc. And finally, it should be pointed out the large-scale threats to biodiversity and the stability and natural value of landscapes in the flooded territories, the threat of destruction within these territories, or the objects of the nature reserve found. 9 objects of the nature reserve found of different nature protection status fell into the zone of influence of flooding. And the worst consequences of the Kakhovka disaster today, we are not no good option to overcome it. As my colleague just said, there were different variants of decision, but unfortunately, it seems to me, unfortunately, any decision will not good, because the worst consequences of Kakhovka disaster. Thank you a lot for your attention.
Thank you, Sergey, for your presentation, and I would like to say thank you to all of our speakers today. It was, to my opinion, it was like some exclusive material that I couldn't hear anywhere else, even in news, because, for example, I didn't hear about some of the consequences, about some of the dimensions. So thank you so much for joining us today and speaking with us about all this and sharing with us all this information. And to our listeners, here on the slide you can see the QR code, how you can help to the rescue now, help rescue and recovery efforts in Ukraine's Kherson region. It is a foundation which is called Rescue Now, and you are invited to help us with some donations, etc. So thank you everyone for joining us today, and the recording will be available as always. Thank you our dear speakers. That's all for today.